Okay, so now that the Constitution has been ratified, let's look at the actual document, particularly the six main principles that make up the Constitution. And I'm going to go through each one of these a little more in depth, but we're going to be looking at separation of powers, checks and balances, limited government, judicial review, and then the two different ways that the Constitution's meaning can be changed, both formally and informally. And each one of these principles is going to tie back into the theme that the main purpose of creating this document was to help squash the opportunity that we would have a tyrannical government, because that was definitely the number one fear of the Founding Fathers. So if we start with the first principle, separation of powers, in order to create a system where not one part of our government was too powerful, the Founding Fathers decided to create three separate branches. And just to kind of get an idea of who and what is in each branch, just real quickly, we first start with, let's start down here in the bottom right, with the legislative branch. When we say the legislative branch, we are talking about Congress, which is made up of two chambers, the House of Representatives, which has 435 members, and then the Senate, which has 100 members, 2 delegates from each state. The main job of the legislative branch is to make laws for our country. Moving over to the executive branch includes the president and all executive agencies. Collectively, the president and his cabinet are the official players in the executive branch. The job of anyone who is part of this branch is to enforce the laws of our country. And lastly, up here at the top, sorry this picture is so small, and sorry I just got a message, we have the judicial branch, who includes the Supreme Court, Court of Appeals, and district courts. The job of the judicial branch is to interpret laws to see if they're in line with the Constitution, which I have spelled very wrong. I apologize. The Constitution, the constitutionality of laws is of the utmost importance, and so it's the job of the judicial branch to make sure that all laws made by the legislative branch and enforced by the executive branch are on point with our Constitution. Now, in order to ensure that we would have a separation of powers, our Founding Fathers created a system of checks and balances. And if you see I have two-way arrows separating each one of the three branches, we get the idea that not one branch is more powerful than the other. And to ensure that this happens, each branch has different powers over the others. And so what I actually would like you students to do is I would like you to come prepared to class with your own examples of checks and balances. So what are some actual powers or ways or actions that allow each one of the three branches to exercise power over the other? And again, this exercising of power is how we keep power separated and prevents one branch from becoming too powerful. All right, the next principle of the Constitution is actually a term that is not written anywhere in the Constitution. However, if you read the Constitution, which is actually a very vague document, judicial review is referred to and insinuated, although it is not explicitly written. So judicial review was officially established and coined as a result of the Supreme Court ruling in the case of Marbury versus Madison in 1803. Essentially, what happened in this case was, as John Adams was exiting the position of president when he was defeated by Thomas Jefferson, he wanted one of his last acts of president to be that he would appoint new federal judges to positions. And this group of judges became known as the Midnight Judges because John Adams literally waited until midnight before he left to commission these judges. Once Thomas Jefferson got word of this, his fear was that all of these judges would have too much of a Federalist perspective, and he did not want too many Federalists making rulings. So he ordered that the commissions not be given to the judges. One of those potential judges, who was Marbury, actually ended up filing a lawsuit, and this case made it all the way to the Supreme Court. And the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court at this time was John Marshall, and he essentially ruled that the Supreme Court did not have the authority to use the Judiciary Act of 1789, And what this did was establish the authority of the court to go back and look at all laws and see if they are unconstitutional. So even though the law that was brought up to support these judges' appointmentship was written all the way back in 1789, the Supreme Court ruled that it has the authority to go back and rule on the constitutionality of issues, even if it is well after the fact. And so this job would obviously fall nicely in the role of the judicial branch. And so the Supreme Court is able to check the power of both Congress and the president by ruling on the constitutionality of laws and actions. And that brings us to our fifth principle, which ties into number 6, and these both look at how we change the Constitution. So as I mentioned, the Constitution is a very, very vague document. And some people would say what is nice about that is that it is open to interpretation, which makes it flexible in terms of its application to today's social context. However, there are also people who take a more literal stance by saying what is written in the Constitution needs to be applied exactly as it is written. I wanted to start with this quote from Thomas Jefferson that I thought was really interesting. So here's Thomas Jefferson back in the late 19th century, and he said the Constitution belongs to the living, not the dead. And obviously what he is inferring is that over time, changes are going to need to be made. So just because people of the past thought that the Constitution was perfect or acceptable doesn't mean that it will always be the case. And so he obviously saw the need or potential opportunities for making changes. And in terms of how the Constitution's meaning can be changed without changing the language, this is what I am talking about when I say informal ways to change it. And there are a couple different ways in which this can happen. Supreme Court rulings, events, and customs. And by Supreme Court rulings, I'm going to give the example of 2 Supreme Court cases that took place nearly 70 years apart. So in 1893, the Supreme Court made a ruling in the case Plessy versus Ferguson that separate but equal facilities are constitutional. If we fast forward to 1954, in the Supreme Court case of Brown versus Board of Education, that Supreme Court and that group of justices actually ruled that separate is inherently unequal. And so the meaning and the interpretation of laws and what the Constitution was saying completely changed, even though the language remained the same. Another example would be the famous Supreme Court case of Roe versus Wade, which examined the issue of right to privacy between a physician and a patient. And even though the term right to privacy does not appear in the actual Constitution, it is inferred through the varying amendments and was upheld by the Supreme Court in that case. And I apologize, I put the word decisions here. By customs, what I'm referring to is just different practices and customs that have now become a consistent part of our political culture. So for example, the cabinet, so the 14 members of the executive branch in addition to the president, the cabinet did not exist when the Founding Fathers were writing the Constitution. So nowhere in the Constitution does it identify who those people are, their positions, what their job means. But over time, the executive branch has grown and solidified different roles. Additionally, there are always some changing and also standing committees within Congress. And these committees are very powerful. But again, congressional committees, that wording will not, you can't find it in the Constitution. It doesn't exist. It doesn't mean that it's not referred to, but the wording, the language is not there. And then lastly, if we look at different events show that the meaning of the Constitution can be interpreted differently. FDR, for example, expanded the presidential powers, especially during World War II. And although he didn't make any or encourage Congress to propose amendments, although he did not change any policies that affected the Constitution, his actions showed a change in the meaning of what powers had been granted in the Constitution and what the exercise of those powers look like. So again, these are all examples of how the Constitution's meaning can be changed without changing the language or without going through a formal process. However, if we do examine the Constitution, there are explicit ways in which there can be formal changes or amendments made to the Constitution. And the amendment process in and of itself actually speaks to the federalist system that our government was built on, because it helps balance state and national power. And as I go through these two different ways, you will see that changing the Constitution can be done by either the states or the federal government. So again, we see that balance. So the first step is actually proposing an amendment. So what change needs to be made to the language of the Constitution? There are two different ways in which this can occur. The first is if there is a 2/3 vote from both houses of Congress proposing the amendment. That is step one. The other option of step one is if if there's a 2/3 vote of a national convention called by Congress on the request of 2/3 of state legislatures. What the heck does that mean? That means that 2/3 of all states need to request that Congress holds a special ratifying convention. You might notice this little asterisk right here, and what this asterisk is indicating is of all 27 amendments that have ever been added to the Constitution, sorry, mail message, not once have those amendments been proposed by this option. All 27 amendments were proposed by Congress. 2/3 vote from each house of Congress is how all of our amendments to date have been proposed. So that might be important. It often shows up on the AP test. So after step one, the proposal step, how is an amendment approved? And again, there are two different ways in which this can happen. It's important to note that Congress, the federal government, can plays a main role in the proposing of amendment. However, no matter which way an amendment is ratified, it's always going to come from the states. So the states have the power in terms of ratifying amendments. So going back to that whole idea of federalism, we see then the balance of national and state governments. Ratifying the amendment can happen, again, one of two ways. If there is an approval by 3/4 of all state legislatures, then the amendment is ratified. Or if there is an approval of 3/4 of special state ratifying conventions. And again, you might notice another asterisk right here. This option has only been used one time in history. The 21st Amendment, which repealed the 18th Amendment, which is prohibition, that is the only time in political history where this method of using a special state ratifying convention has ever been used to ratify an amendment. So again, 21st Amendment, is the only time in which we use the second option. All other amendments were simply approved by a 3/4 vote from state legislatures.